Good evening, everyone. If you guys want to make your way towards the stage here, those that are here for Vinspire, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So we just want to welcome everyone. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, no worries.
There's one in every crowd.
Oh, there wasn't. I thought there was glass on top. Was there glass? Oh, I was stepping on it. I was like, I thought there was glass. And I didn't break it when I stood in one of the lights out. All right, we're all good. Yeah, let me get that. We're all good. We just want to welcome everyone to Vinspire, and thank you very much for coming out tonight. And we also want to thank KT and all of the Old Soul crowd for having us. And we would love if you would, purchase a drink, alcoholic or non-alcoholic. Both are offered, but to help support them, because we really appreciate having this lovely space to provide these programs. And I will turn it over to Dana, who is going to introduce Wilder. And again, thank you very much.
He's going to take it and run. This is yours. You have your own. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. I have known Wilder for, I want to say, what year did you move here?
94?
Okay, I've known you the entire time. Wilder came to CVPH to work as our infectious disease specialist, and that was the height of the AIDS epidemic, wasn't it?
It was indeed. That's why I came.
Yes, he brought help to CVPH. He has had a storied career between the Navy, medicine, and now life coach. And your polarity thinking, I'm dying to hear about. Yeah. We were chatting, and I said, what brought you to this? And he said, I'm coaching people, and I wanted them to get unstuck. And he found this technique, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all about it. Cool. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. You can, yeah, it's working. So I'm hoping to have a little audience participation. In fact, this will not work without audience participation. So we won't do any therapy or anything like that. But I might invite some people to, volunteer for some stuff. Yeah, not my wife. So, polarities. I actually, I forgot that I told Dana that. So I've been doing coaching for a couple of years now. I started coaching before I left CVPH, and now I do leadership coaching and life coaching. And what I noticed is a lot of people, in the coaching sessions, they'd have amazing insights and they'd be all gung-ho, and yet they wouldn't make the progress that they wanted to make. And it wasn't because they were, weak. It wasn't because they didn't really want to. I didn't believe that. I chose to believe it wasn't because I was a bad coach. But it could have been. It could have been that. And so, I started digging around, and purely by accident came across this idea of polarity thinking, and it's a really cool way that I get really excited about because it can help people get unstuck. It can help organizations get unstuck. It can help teams get unstuck. It can help overcome resistance to change, and it's especially useful in conflict as well. It's sort of a universal tool because polarities are kind of a universal concept. So before I get going, is anybody really familiar with polarity thinking? Again.
Dina has heard. This Dina. We've got two Dinas
tonight. So what?
Has the.
Yeah, there's a connection. Yeah. Actually, some of the principles of polarity management are similar to Gestalt principles. Polarities are a polarity is a pair of two ideas, values, or concepts that on their surface seem to be opposing, opposite each other. But in fact, they are interdependent. And what I mean by that is they need each other over time. What do I mean by that? So the easiest way, and polarities are in nature, they are in our bodies, and they are pretty universal in the human experience. So an easy polarity, that is a natural polarity that you are experiencing in this moment, is a polarity of inhaling and exhaling. It would be ridiculous to think of only inhaling. It would be ridiculous to think of only exhaling. In fact, the idea of inhaling or exhaling makes no sense. And we live in that every day. Another polarity that we live in every day is the polarity of rest and activity. Again, they need each other over time. For a while, you can focus just on activity to the exclusion of rest. For a while, you can focus just on rest to the exclusion of activity. But over time, you need to go in the other direction. And I'm going to...
Do you want the stand? Do you want the mic stand?
Or
I can hold the mic up here.
yeah, I'm just going to talk loudly.
Okay.
So, if you think about rest, the polarity of rest and activity, rest has certain upsides associated with it. Activity has certain upsides. If you overfocus on rest to the exclusion of activity, you will get certain downsides. So, shout out. What are some of the benefits of rest?
Rejuvenation.
Rejuvenation.
Clear thinking.
What else?
Checking out.
Checking. I'll go with rejuvenation, checking out. So think about physical activity or physical rest. It's,
You get more energy.
you actually get muscle building during rest. Okay? We'll stick with those three. What if you rest to the exclusion of activity for a prolonged period of time? What do you experience then? What would be the downside of excessive rejuvenation?
Like atrophy.
Atrophy. Brain atrophy and muscle atrophy. What else?
Turning into a sloth.
A sloth.
Boredom.
Boredom. Even depression. Oh, we'll just write boredom because my handwriting is so bad. So if you get to the point where you have rested too much and you are starting to experience these things, you are going to have a natural desire and energy to go up to the upsides of activity, which are upsides of activity.
Endorphins.
Endorphins. What else? Well, a hint, it's the opposite of some of this. So,
Excitement.
excitement,
Energy. Better sleep.
strength. And then, if you overfocus on activity to the exclusion of rest, you're going to get the downsides of overactivity, which are
Exhaustion.
exhaustion,
Soreness. Injury. Looking bad. Too many muscles. Not attractive.
I'm going to leave that one off. Exhaustion, injury. My daughter's a personal trainer. She would argue with me. So, injury, exhaustion, and breakdown. Right. So this is the polarity of rest and activity. And the thing about polarities, which you can see, is they follow a natural rhythm. And there's an energy in that rhythm. In that, if you end up down here, your natural inclination is to go here. If you spend too much time up here, you will eventually end up down here. If you end up down here, your natural inclination is to go up here. If you spend too much time, you will eventually
You
get
did the
down.
infinity sign.
So it is in fact the infinity. So, you know, rest activity, so what? Yes, we all live in this, who cares? Once you understand a polarity and you understand the energy in it, you can use it, you can leverage that polarity. So on a day-to-day basis, none of us give too much thought to the polarity of rest and activity. We might give a little, oh, I feel a little tired and take a nap, okay, but we don't give too much thought to it. But say I wanted to run a marathon. The person not aware of this polarity or not having any support in this might overfocus on activity. But in fact, people who want to run a marathon or do a triathlon, they build a schedule that incorporates both of these. Because what they want to do is get the best of both of these. They want to have adequate rest time for muscle building, adequate rest time for rejuvenation, mental and physical, but they also need adequate activity. And then on top of that, so they would build action plans or schedules around these two things. And then on top of that, what you could do is you could build warning signs. You could build in early warning signs in that schedule that say, you know, what are my warning signs that I'm spending too much time here in the activity side? Maybe I'm having more muscle soreness, or maybe actually my times are getting worse rather than better. And if you start hitting those early warning signs, you're going to go here, right? And do a little bit more of that. And then you'll build early warning signs on that. So that's how to use polarities and how to leverage them to achieve something. So, I don't know if any of you are going to run a marathon, and this one might not matter. But it's also, polarities can be very useful for helping people that are stuck. So, I'm going to read a list of things, and pay attention if there's anything on that list that maybe you have struggled with, either struggled to not do, or struggled to do, but not been successful. So, have you struggled ever with candor or being direct? Either too much or too little? Have you struggled with tough love? Either too much or too little? Have you struggled with either giving help or accepting help? Have you struggled with work-life balance? Have you struggled with confidence or self-assurance? Have you struggled with structure, too much or too little? So, any of those resonate with anybody? Dana, you're nodding your head. Whoa. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. So, Dana, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Yes. Which one?
Which one? Life balance.
Life balance. Okay. So. So, which one do you want on the left, and which one do you tend to do?
You mean be on every committee and every this and every
Right.
that?
So,
yes.
so you tend to over-focus on your work life
And community life.
and under-focus on your non-work
Yes.
life.
Yes.
Okay. And we'll let work include the
Community
community
events.
work.
Yeah.
You're right.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So this is work, and this is, I just call it non-work. I always hate the work-life balance. Like, work is part of life. I don't work for it. Anyway, so, Dana, what are some of the downsides that you experience? So this is your content. What are some of the downsides that you experience as a result of an over-focus on work?
Not having enough time to do things that help me replenish.
So I'm going to put no downtime. Is that okay?
Works. Yep.
What else?
Not giving myself time to exercise enough. Not working exercise in the plan.
No, can I say self-care?
Well, I do meditate every day, but yeah, you can.
Okay. Well, I'll write.
I do make sure it's exercise.
Not
Exercise.
enough.
Yeah.
I'll write exercise.
Yeah.
What else?
not being my cheery self, not giving, not being all there for the people who need me and for myself. Fatigue, yeah.
I don't resonate with this at all.
You said pick one, I was gonna say the whole list.
So I wrote not cheery.
Okay.
Okay.
Which
Anything
is so
else?
unlike me. I mean, there are, but we don't have enough paper.
Well, give me one. Give me one more. Or someone else,
Strain on the
anybody else who struggles or has struggled with work and non-life balance, help me fill in one or two more here. Exhaustion.
Time with my kids.
Yeah, and just relationship, like your love life.
Guilt.
talk to this group.
All right. I wrote time with family and relationships. All right. All right. That's enough. Okay. All right. So, if you think about what we did with the rest and activity, what if you were in this space? What would you like to move to? Hint, hint. Everything here is the opposite of everything here. All right. So we could go with
Exercise schedule.
downtime, exer. I can never spell that word. Schedule.
Cheery.
Cheery.
Cheerful.
I don't get cheery. Cheery. Not cheery.
Rested. Yeah.
Rested. Time with family. This is no time with family. And poor relationships. So, time for family and time for relation.
Wonder, would it help if I were your Vanna White? Do you want me to write for you?
If you want, yeah.
Or Margaret, I could, because I don't know what this was.
Because your handwriting is about as bad as mine, actually.
I'm gonna be fine and do whatever color. Okay. Okay.
All right. So, downtime, you'd have plenty of downtime, you'd have a schedule for exercise, you'd be more cheerful, you'd be more rested, you'd have more time for family, you'd have more time for relationships, right? What would happen if you did these to excess? Can't hear me? What would happen if Dana did these to excess, to the exclusion of any of her work? In other words, if she just said, "I'm done with work, I'm done with community, I'm going
Brother
to
wouldn't be happy.
I'm going to do everything here all the time." So, if you had downtime all the time, what would happen?
My work would suffer. I wouldn't get all my work.
Okay, so your work would suffer.
Be like sluggish.
You might be broke.
You might be broke. Sluggish, yeah, sort of, yeah.
I think you'd feel like kind of overused. Like you'd never have an excuse like, okay, she can do it. She'll say yes.
But she's not doing any of this stuff. She's only doing this stuff.
Yeah, but
Only
for your
when they're done.
family, your family.
Ah,
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Overused, feeling overused by family. Okay. Yeah.
Jumping down the list now.
What about excess time for relationships? People get tired of you.
How could they get tired of it?
Yeah. Divorce. Did someone say divorce? Yeah. There is such a thing as too much of your partner, right?
Dana, I think you might lack purpose.
Yes.
too much time with partner. Okay. Okay. So that's good. Now, if we take these and we say, if we're experiencing all these, what would we do?
Go to work.
We would. Yeah. Well, if instead of our work suffering, we would be highly effective at work.
Yes.
That's the good stuff about work.
It's the good stuff about work. Exactly. Right?
Okay.
We'd have money. We'd be engaged. Not, yes, we'd be engaged.
In more ways than one.
Yeah. You know, we wouldn't feel resentful of our family. Our partner might not get tired of us.
Partnerships would be fresh.
Fresh partnership, I like that. Yeah, better wording. And a sense of purpose. All right. So Dana, now I'm going to ask you, if you look at this, does this sort of encapsulate for you what this polarity would look like?
Yeah. I think when I overcommit with committees and things like that, and then another committee asks me, you feel bad when you can't do everything for everybody. But then you get exhausted, and then you
Alrighty, so now I'm going to ask you to do something. So what I want you to do is just close your eyes. Again, you do not reveal anything that you don't want to reveal in front of people. Seriously.
Be recorded.
So, and I'm not going to ask for any details. So I'm going to read down this first list.
Okay.
All right, I'm just going to read down each of these lists.
Okay.
And for anyone else who might be familiar with this particular polarity and experience of some, I want you to do the same thing for yourself. And I'm going to read down the list, and I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you to put yourself in the mode where that is what your life is. All right? And then I want to ask you, when you're done with that, how are you feeling about that? So, you're highly effective, you have money, you're mentally engaged, you don't resent family, you have fresh relationship with your partner, and you have a sense of purpose. So how does that feel? It feels great.
Yes.
All right? So just write great. Thank you.
Should I draw Tony the Tiger?
Thank you. Now, I'm going to read this box down here. Same thing. No downtime, no self-care or exercise, not cheerful, exhausted, no time for family, and no time for your partner.
Life sucks.
How's that? All right. Okay. Now, imagine that you are in this space with plenty of downtime. You have a full time to do as much exercise as you want. You are cheerful. You are rested. You have all the time in the world for family. And you have plenty of time for relationship.
That's great too.
That's great too. Does it
But how
feel
do I do
different?
both? Yeah.
Does it feel different than that?
No, I love both.
You love both. Okay, great.
Yeah, they're both great.
All right. So last one. Your work would suffer. You'd be broke. You'd be bored. You'd feel overused by your family. You'd have too much time with your partner, and you would lack purpose.
I don't know if there's such thing. Yes.
Yeah. So how does that feel?
Yeah.
No. Which of these two spaces, if I might ask, or think about yourself, feels more comfortable to you?
Equally good.
Okay. Do either of these spaces feel worse than the other?
The non-work.
This one feels worse. So this is your worst.
Well, they're pretty.
Yeah, but they both suck. There's no doubt about it.
This one
Yeah.
probably sucks more.
Yeah. But I'm going to go with your first.
You're gonna go with my. We are broke, isn't it?
Well, no, that's not a good
That's not a
look.
good look for
That's
me.
not a good look. Yeah, so you don't have to stand up here anymore or
Okay.
write. So, there you go. So how does this help? Imagine that Dana was really, because Dana thinks she's struggling horribly with this. Maybe she is, I don't know, but it's not a terrible life struggle. But imagine somebody who really is sucked into this work, like working 15 hours a day, and really their personal life, their suffering, and as much as they know that they want to spend more time here, they can't. And the question is, why? Well, there could be multiple reasons. One way to help people get unstuck is so people will come. So imagine someone comes to me as a coach and says, I have this problem. I'm a workaholic and I can't stop. So what we would do is we would start down here and say, what are the negatives you were experiencing? And we would essentially do this process. Go from here, up to here, down to here, and then here. And one of the things you notice is the opposites of the diagonals. And if you go through this, so we went here, 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 a lot of what is here ends up being the opposite of this, right? If you started here and went here, here, and here, these things would be opposite. It doesn't matter where you start on the map. You start wherever the person is experiencing the problem. And they say, I want to spend more time, I just can't do it. And the problem is what they're looking at is they're experiencing this downside here, all the downsides of working too hard. They see this as, this is a problem, and this is the solution. And yet, no matter how hard they grab at it, they can't. And the reason is they're stuck. And the way they're stuck is that they're not necessarily cognizant or thinking of these two quadrants. They're thinking of this is the problem and this is the solution. These two quadrants might be a little bit not up at the surface for them. But it's these two quadrants that are blocking them because they are subconsciously afraid that if I go here, I will lose everything I value here, and I will get all the negative effects of losing what I value. And it creates literally a wall. And it will block people every time. Sometimes merely filling out the whole map with people and going through this exercise helps them see what they haven't been seeing. And then you say, well, what do I do with this? And this is where, Dina, you brought up Gestalt. So I am not a Gestalt practitioner. I don't know a lot about it. But there is a saying, a maxim in Gestalt thinking, that true change happens only when you embrace who you truly are. Right? The first place, if I'm working with a client or an organization or whatever, and we've created a map, and they want to go from here to here and they're stuck. And they're stuck because there's a wall between these diagonals. The first place we go is not, okay, what are we going to action plan about the new place? The first place we go is we action plan about the good stuff of where they are. Because there's a reason they do some of the stuff. They don't do some of the stuff they do because they want to be here. There are really good reasons to work. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to say, what am I going to do before I contemplate changing? What am I going to do to lock in and make sure I do not lose these things? Once they do that, then you can start saying, okay, not how am I going to change? What about this could I gradually add in to this? What are little steps I could take to not substitute for any of this, but to add into this? And that's essentially the process. Now, there often is a lot more to it. A lot of times, so Dana is not that troubled with this. Sometimes when people really are troubled, and you walk through the feeling exercise. Let's say this is comfortable. This is yucky, but I live there, so it's not that bad. This is interesting, exciting, but anxiety-provoking. And this creates sheer terror. Absolute terror for people. And a lot of times, when you dig into it, there are life experiences that might have contributed to that. There are things from their childhood, and I don't mean horrible trauma. There could be, but it could be anything. The way they were raised or whatever. And there are hidden assumptions that they're not even aware of because they have fears. The fears are driven by hidden assumptions. That if I do any of this stuff, something really bad is going to happen. The overt fear is I'm going to end up here, but there's an underlying fear usually. I had a really interesting, I was working with someone who was struggling with confidence. And so he was living in the downside of humility, let's say. And he was, not willing to speak up at work. He felt like no one was acknowledging his accomplishments. He felt like he was ineffective. He questioned his own decision making, etc., etc. All of the things of excess humility to a fault. And he had tried for years, but most recently for a couple of years to try to move here. Once we did this and we described these two quadrants, I said, is there anything familiar about this quadrant to you? And he said, oh God, yeah. A number of years ago in his career, he had a boss who had, the upside of confidence is all the good things we know. The downside is arrogance, cockiness, hasty decisions, telling people what to do. He had a boss. He was not innately like that, but he had a boss that insisted he be like that and basically required him to be like that. And as a result, he lost relationships, he lost friends, he lost status at the organization, and so on and so forth. And so he was horrified of ever going back there. And so he was unable to access his confidence, which he had previously. So that's how these things can get people stuck. So before I go on, questions? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? So, how might this show up or be useful in conflict?
Depends what the conflict's about.
Well, so let's. I promised Dan I wasn't going to get to too touchy subjects, but our political landscape now is rife with polarities. I'm not going to take the touching stories. I promised it. So, but if you think about one of the conflicts out there in our political landscape, as on one side nationalism and the other side globalism, right? Dana?
Yep.
My writing is so bad, and then if I have to do it one-handed. So nationalism, globalism.
Globalism?
Globalism, yeah. Yeah. So the key thing in using a polarity in evaluating conflict. Now granted, nobody out there in the national landscape wants to listen to me talk about this. And remember that our news media and politicians thrive on the conflict. The conflict is the thing. But imagine that you actually had a position where you could start to negotiate this conflict. You start from the assumption, which is almost always correct, that everybody wants the same thing. They want a healthy America. You also start from the assumption that both of them do not want a failing America. And then the first thing, almost all conflicts have one or more polarities at the root. So they're not an either-or proposition. So both sides are, in both sides in this debate, are correct. They are both correct in what they see. right? The only difference, the only thing is that they're blind to part of it, right? So if you think about nationalism, so if you think about nationalism, what are the upsides of nationalism? There are. Yeah. So that sort of American identity. Identity. Yeah.
Self-sufficiency.
Yeah. America can do it ourselves. Self-sufficiency. What else? I have notes, but you guys are getting them.
Well, strength, trying to be stronger.
So okay, yeah, let's put strength. What else? I had American uniqueness. I wrote American exceptionalism. And then national self-determination. That may seem odd, but ask someone in Europe about ask someone in England, right, about this. So national self-determination.
I think a lot of us appreciate the melting pot that we are and what made our country what it is.
Correct. Absolutely. But is there anything wrong with any of these things? So, in fact, the people that believe primarily in nationalism are not wrong. They are correct. These are good things. There's nothing wrong with those things. Right? Globalism. What are the positive aspects of globalism? I did the exercise ahead of time myself, so someone.
Efficiency.
Yeah. So efficiency and synergy. Synergy. You know.
Having alliances.
I'm sorry?
Alliances.
Alliances. Yeah. Collaboration and alliances.
Resources.
Resources, right. We don't have all the resources. Access to resources. Right?
I think about it as caring for our planet together.
Yeah. Being able to address global issues. Yeah. Climate being, right? And again, this polarity of nationalism, globalism is at the root of some of the challenges around climate change.
Shared goals.
Shared goals, yeah. Yeah, getting to space. Energy, yeah. So the people that believe in globalism are right as well. All these things are good things. Now, if I ask the folks that believe in nationalism, what are the negatives of nationalism? What are they going to say? Not that they are blind to those for any number of reasons. Maybe the work they do, the family they live in, the community they live in, the news media they watch, whatever it is, they are blind to the negatives of nationalism. You know. But they could tell you all about the negatives of globalism. So let's start there. What might be some of the negatives of globalism? Dependency. Absolutely. Which is the opposite of self-sufficiency. What are some of the other negatives of globalism?
There's economic, like jobs.
Yeah, you.
Competition.
Yes. Yeah, loss of. Hurt the American economy. I don't know.
Competition.
Competition. Yeah.
It's literally weakness in a way. You think when I said strength, it should
Yeah.
be. It doesn't have to be, but from a very nationalist perspective, it could be total weakness in lessening the strength of the national.
Well, yeah.
By considering the global, you weaken the national.
Which was very much one of the themes of Brexit, right? Yeah. So a weakening of the American identity and the American sense of strength.
Exceptional.
Yeah, non-exceptionalism, right? So nationalists, primarily nationalists, are going to be fairly blind to the downsides. Folks that believe primarily in globalism are going to be very well aware of the negatives of nationalism, which might include what are some of the negatives of excess nationalism to the exclusion of a sense of globalism. So I'll add, America could end up siloed in the world. Isolation. Isolationism.
Restricted resources. Higher costs.
Higher costs, we could end up, yeah.
Threats.
Right, we'd have no friends. We would have primarily enemies. So I picked a national conflict because everybody's familiar with it, but this will work with any conflict. Every single conflict is there's a polarity at its root. And in almost all polarities, the exercise of going through this is a conversation about values. What do you value? The people on the nationalist side value these things as the most important. The people on the globalism side value these things as more important, right? And what do they fear? They fear the loss of this, which is here. And what do these folks fear? They fear the loss of this, which lives down here. And so the work in working through a conflict is to, if you could bring people to the table, and frequently you can, we are not, imagine Plattsburgh. Imagine if you actually had explored some of the issues about crime from a standpoint of economic development versus some other thing. There are polarities at work with the whole issue of crime. It was treated as an either-or conversation. The polarity is probably an economic development versus, I don't know.
Tough on crime.
What's that?
Being tough on crime.
Tough on crime.
Right, I mean.
I'm sorry, crime. I'm talking about the crime.
I'm sorry.
The crime. Yeah. I even had the microphone. Maybe I wasn't diction. Yeah. So I am sure that there's a polarity of economic development and something else. I don't know what that something else is, but if you worked through with the folks that were for and against crime, you could develop a map like this. And then you could say to the folks who were against it, okay, what do we need to make sure we maintain if we're going to do crime? And then what do we do, about crime? And you would basically be able to develop plans that would address both sides of the conflict. It's just a tool around compromise, but if you're aware of the polarity, you can actually leverage it and max it. You can get the most out of it. Compromise is just nobody's happy. A well-leveraged polarity, you could end up with both parties actually being happy because what's most important to them is it remains. So, thoughts, ideas, questions? Yes?
So Wilder, in the prior example you talked about, you began to discuss it and then you kind of shifted to a different topic, but is the next step then to say small incremental changes?
It depends what...
So it's not either or, it's sort of like how do we just find that middle?
Yeah, so it depends on it depends how you're using polarity thinking to accomplish something. If it's a conflict thing, what you really want to, developing the map is actually the most important part in conflict. Because what happens is the folks here and here start to truly understand the needs and desires and values of the other folks. And they don't argue with them because these are all good things. There's not a darn thing in these top two quadrants that is not something to value. It's just a question about I value this a bit more and you value that. But as soon as you start seeing the other party in the conflict as someone who has legitimate things that they care about and value, and you can validate that those are legitimate things to value, and yeah, I can agree with it, all of a sudden you can take the temperature down. So in a conflict situation, this is probably the most important place to get there, because that starts to get people to work together. And then you say, okay, then it's really a what could we do to make sure that we get the best of this, and what could we do to make sure we get the best of this. So that's in a conflict situation. In a change situation, and we did a personal example, but it's the same with an organizational change. Like, I think the data are somewhere between 60 and 80% of all organizational change initiatives fail or are never sustained, right? Anyone who's worked for a large organization is fairly familiar with that, right, Dana? Yeah. And part of the issue is that the way a change comes about is the organization is experiencing something negative, right? They're experiencing something negative. And so it's a problem. We have a problem, right? They see a bright, shiny object, which is the solution to the problem, right? So they say, I want to go from here to here, right? And a couple of things might happen. They never actually get off the ground. They get off the ground, but they experience continued difficult resistance in the organization. So if you're in that situation, or better yet, planning an organizational initiative, you could use this process in the planning. And you can engage people who might be predictably anti the change. So what instead happens is the organization says, this is the problem, we want to go here. There's people that so in the polarity, the simple polarity is the current state, the future state, right? We're in the downside of the current state, we want to go to the upside of some future state, whatever that is, right? So these people over here, they don't see all the problems with the current state, but they experience a lot of good with the current state. You know, especially the farther they are from the decision makers about the change to be considered, right? And so they're going, and they're pretty familiar with the upsides of the current state, and they can look at this thing and they can see all the problems with this upcoming change, right? So if you can get that out on the table at the beginning, you can actually plan your change to make sure that you put in action plans to maintain the good stuff. Essentially, to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it's actually the first thing you do. Instead of planning the change action steps, you plan these action steps. And the way I heard it explained the other day is the baby bathwater. If you have a tub, you have a bathwater and a baby in it, what's the first thing you're going to do before you throw out the bathwater? You're going to grab onto the baby, you're going to hold on to the baby, right? Identify the good things about the current state. Whatever state you're in and the problems you're associating it, you got there because there were good things about it, right? You may have forgotten them, but there are people in the organization who have not forgotten them. So, in fact, the order of things is to start with the good things about the current state in a change, right? And plan around that, and then you can plan around the upsides of the future. With an individual, like where I described that they're stuck, right? It's the same thing. Recognize the good things of where you are, and what are we going to do to protect those? Because if they don't feel those things are protected, they will never go to their desired state. They'll never become more confident. They'll never work less, whatever the individual block is. So it depends a little bit on the issue at hand. So, and the issue that happens is polarities is not widely known, although is becoming. The guy who I learned this from was just asked to be on a UN International Global Committee about planning the UN for the next 50 years. And they wanted him there because they wanted to incorporate polarities into their discussion. So it's starting to break through, but most organizations are not aware of this. So there's an organization with which I'm familiar, but shall go unnamed, that about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, had multiple components to the organization, and there was a lot of differences with the way each component operated. In fact, the organization was very decentralized decision-making, decentralized processes, and they were different at every organization, right? This was a problem, and it was treated as a problem. The problem needs to be solved. The solution, if you treat a polarity as a problem, you will see a solution. The solution is centralization. And currently that organization is going willy-nilly centralizing everything. Okay. What will happen? Eventually, excess bureaucracy. Eventually, slowness of anything happening. Eventually, their best and brightest will leave, right? Because everything, all the high-end decision-making is concentrated centrally. Nobody gets to do anything. The best and the brightest will leave. It's quite possible that all those things are already happening, right? And eventually, someone might say, hey, we're all down here, we need to go back here. Instead, if this organization had understand that decentralization and centralization are not an either-or phenomenon, but in fact, a both-and, right? We want to centralize where it makes sense and where we can get the most benefit, and we want to allow local decision-making where it makes the most sense and where we get the most benefit. If you could actually do that and plan that, you would have a much more functional organization that would not experience some of the downsides, so many of the downsides of either one. The nature of a polarity is you're always a little bit. Remember Dana said it's an infinity loop. If you manage a polarity really well, you have a lopsided polarity loop, or infinity loop. It gets really high up here, just a little bit down here, really high up here, just a little bit down here. So, but you have to recognize the polarity and plan around it. And again, polarity thinking is not, it's starting to show up in business schools now. And I love it because it helps get people unstuck. I'm not a psychotherapist. I have no desire to do psychotherapy. Sometimes we get some interesting stuff here. When we say, the box that they're most afraid of, why are you most afraid of that? When I asked you to think about being in that box, what came to mind? And they'll tell me some interesting stories, sometimes some sad stories, right? And those things make them terrified of that box, right? And terrified of losing this. So whatever it might be. So it's incredibly powerful. All it is a tool, it's a framework, it's a way of thinking. There's no magic to it other than that. But the fact is, if you treat a polarity as a problem, you will eventually get into the downsides of the solution. And if you stay there long enough, the nature of polarities, you will get the downsides of both, right? So the marathon, training for a marathon. If you overfocus on activity, you eventually will have injury. That injury will force you to be laid up. So eventually, you will be laid up so long that you'll get the downsides of rest without getting the upsides. So the nature of polarities are that. And what happens is when organizations treat a polarity as a problem to solve, people suffer. Sadly, early on, it's not the people making the decisions that suffer. It's the downstream people. And if the people making the decisions are powerful enough, they can force through. And I said polarities need each other over time. The guy I learned this from talked about the Russian history as a swinging back and forth of a polarity loop. And you can understand the swing from Tsarist Russia to Stalin to the current standpoint by looking at a polarity loop. The time is really long. Like inhaling and exhaling is like that. Rest and activity is 24-hour cycle. The cycle in Russia is, you know.
You keep from the positive of where you really want to change and reflect on the fears of what might happen and find a healthy balance that will work by addressing all of that.
Another verbiage for it other than polarities was given to me by my wife, who is an active reader of Richard Rohr. And some of you may be familiar with Richard Rohr. Is he Jesuit? No. Franciscan monk.
Radical.
And radical Franciscan monk. And has the Center for Action and Contemplation. So, but she sent me a reading that she gets daily readings. She sent me this reading, and it was incredible reading. And it's actually very helpful to think about at times like this. And essentially, what he talked about was we follow cycles of order and chaos. And he essentially, his writing talked about order and chaos as a polarity. That excessive order has its downsides. And then, and chaos has upsides, right? There's much more creativity at chaos. New systems, new ideas, new thoughts emerge in chaos. And so when we look at the world through the lens of today, it just feels so oppressive. But if you were able to think about something different is going to emerge. I mean, what's happening in America is not just an American phenomenon. It's a worldwide phenomenon, right? Something different will emerge. We don't know what it'll be. And we may be in a period, remembering they need each other over time, but they're not always simultaneous, right? So we're entering a period of chaos, you know, of messiness. Anyone who had raised kids, right? They're moving along fine, and then they're about to move to the next level, and they get into a period of messiness and bad behavior and troublesome behavior, and then they move to the next level. And the wording he used around this polarity was include and transcend. So the task is, amid this chaos, to include the good things about what we are currently experiencing, add to that, and transcend to a higher level, right? And I think it's a really neat way to think about, instead of thinking about we have to change is very, like if I tell you you have to change, it's almost an assault on your identity. Like, this is who I am, I don't want to change. If I instead say, I want you to keep being you, I just want you to add to you, it becomes much more manageable to think about. So you can think about it on an individual level. You can think about it in your organization. You can think about it in your community. You can think about it in the national and the global state. And again, the UN, who is planning all sorts of, you know, they're planning for the next 50 years, is incorporating polarity thinking into their thinking about the major issues facing the globe, which really transcend way beyond you know, Biden and Trump.
You do your little vignettes. I don't know how you want to describe them, but
Yeah.
I just saw you have one included.
Yeah. I liked it so much.
Yeah, you're going to do a series on
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And the other one was the doctor is out.
yeah, doctor's out.
Yeah. What was the concept? I know you had different.
Well, so for fun, and in part because I was challenged. So when I did my coach training a couple of years ago, I made some friends all over the world. I made a particular friend in London who was also doing this. And we couldn't be more different. She came from a corporate marketing environment. And so I was talking to her one day. We talk about every 3 or 4 months. I was talking about retirement coming and that I was going to be doing this gig. And she's a marketer. She said, you should, you know, she said, I've read some of your blogs on your website. You should do videos. And I was like, I can't do videos. So she dared me. So I do videos. I don't know if anybody watches them. Sometimes they go across Facebook. Some people like them. The doctor is out. The first one I recorded was the day of my retirement. So I was out, right? And I was also, they are all recorded when I'm walking my dogs out at the city beach. So out being outside. So that was the doctor's out. There were leadership things. And then I stopped doing them for a while because I didn't have inspiration. And then this include and transcend. And I love this idea so much. So now I'm doing a series of videos on include and transcend.
So how do we get to them?
YouTube or,
Okay.
yeah, you can, I actually have a YouTube channel. If you look up my name. I do put most of them out on Facebook or Instagram. And it's just a link that then takes you to the YouTube video. They're a minute long. It's not a minute and 20 seconds. She told me anything longer, she said, you're not well known enough to deserve more than a minute. No, I mean, she meant that very seriously. She said, until you get very well known with lots of followers who hang on your every word, you cannot do a 5 minute, because my first one was 5 minutes. She said, 1 minute. I said a minute and 20 seconds, so they're all a minute and 20 seconds.
Yeah, and people can retain and retell that way. You
Yeah.
can't retain and retell a 5 minute, but you can.
Yes. It forces me to actually be very parsimonious with words. So
Ooh, I like that word.
they're fun. Anyway, I'm losing my voice. Any other questions? I don't know.
I think it's interesting from a nephrology standpoint, kidney specialty. You know, when you say polarity or polar or poles, we think of the left pole.
Yeah.
You know, Ohm's law and the fact of the positive and negative, the cathode
Yeah.
and anode. And it's like you can't have one pole without the other.
No.
And having both of those poles, there's driving force. That is the driving
There's,
force.
it's the energy in that.
Once you lose that polarity, you can't operate anything.
Yep.
And so in our cells, if we lose the clarity, like if our potassium changes, you won't have insulin. Things won't function.
Yeah.
If you don't have these two poles, that's worse.
Oh, way
having
worse.
our two parties
Yeah.
and having these differences, although they're crazy, right
Yeah.
now, a two-party system is important because that's what makes these driving forces and make things work. And we know that because even in law, people come up with much better contracts when you have two people arguing and coming up with some kind of agreement. So somehow I love what you're saying. We are gonna, the fact that we're going through these swings, we're gonna transcend and come to something better eventually.
Something different.
But it takes time.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I love your point about the energy because so polarities, nobody invented polarities. They exist. They exist in our bodies. They exist in the kidneys. I was thinking of a battery. A battery is a polarity, right? And that's one that we think about all the time. You can't have one you can't have the anode without the cathode. But the guy who really wrote the book on this, he wrote his first book in the 70s, his follow-up book, which if you're really interested in this, he's written a fabulous book which really talks about global issues, and he gets way more complicated because polarities can stack upon each other, and he talks about power and how power drives polarities. It's a very interesting book. It's called And his name is Barry Johnson. But he talked, it was his thinking that said, we have these polarities, and there is energy in these polarities. And so we can either ignore that energy to our detriment, or we can leverage that energy. And the act of polarity management is to take the energy in the polarity. So you have two sides. You have the people who are resisting a change in your organization. You have the people who are promoting a change. They both have energy around that. So if you can harvest the energy to say, what do we need to include at the next place, and what do we need to add at the next place? And there are things, and even the people who resist change, there are things that they can easily be convinced of negatives that we need to exclude, right? And so it's not all just about adding interminably. Yeah.
When it comes to politics, in my mind, one thing you're leaving out,
I'm leaving out tons.
which trumps a lot, okay, so no pun intended, is winning.
Yeah.
Winning. And you're kind of assuming that some people on one side might like some of the aspects of the other, but if they don't win, they don't really care. So it's like winning goes above everything, even if they So, not for everyone, but so there used to be more of when somebody wins, let's all get behind that person and hope that they move in a positive direction for everyone. And that's kind of gone away. There's more of a resistance now. We're against that person. We're going to try to stop that person.
Yep.
And so,
Well, winning is an either or. Either you are right or I am right. And frankly, I am right and you are wrong, right? So that is the nature of our political environment. But again, they are taking things that are polarities and treating them as either or rather than both ends. You're exactly right.
we've lost that chivalrous team.
And there are
thing.
all sorts of reasons for that,
Yeah.
you know. And one of the things that Barry Johnson likes to say is when you peel apart conflicts from a polarity lens and you start to understand that both sides have truth to them. And I will argue Trump, Biden, both sides have truth to them, right? When you peel that away and start to see that, you actually become capable of loving your enemy. Because now you actually see them as opposed to just something that's wrong. So, yes, do I wish other people would see this? Well, I guess that's why I'm talking about it here in this little tiny corner of my world. To people that probably intuitively sense these polarities pretty much. What I love is actually the idea of, okay, yeah, we live, it's not either or, but how do we take that idea and actually use it? Use the energy that exists in the kidney, it exists in rest activity, and it exists in all the human polarities that we experience. And there's a ton of them that are universal. So one that is especially universal is the concept of justice and mercy, right? Justice without mercy is brutality. Mercy without justice is ineffective, or there's a better word than that. It's a famous quote. You can look up, Martin Luther King has a quote about justice and mercy. Justice and mercy is a polarity. That if you focus only on justice, you will have the natural effects. If you focus only on mercy, you will have the natural effects. And that the idea is it's a polarity. I do a lot of leadership coaching, and one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people have, is giving hard feedback to people, right? And we talk about we work through a polarity that's a pretty common polarity, which is a variation on justice and mercy, which is conditional respect and unconditional respect. In a family, it would be conditional love and unconditional love, right? In the workplace, and there are both, right? In the workplace, conditional respect is I respect the work you have done, and I don't respect if you have not done the work. That is the conditional respect. And in fact, that is a necessary part of leadership. The unconditional respect is for the person. The conditional respect is based on the work. The unconditional respect is based on the person. And the pathway to being able to give hard feedback about performance is to first care about that individual as a person and make it clear that you care about that. Understand what's important to that person. And when you truly see that person, then that very caring will enable you to give the feedback that you want to give, because I don't want you to lose your job. I don't want you to fail at your job. The assumption is most people actually want to be successful, which is in a good assumption, 98% of the time. So not always. So it's a classic polarity: justice, mercy, conditional respect, conditional love, unconditional love. If you only love people unconditionally, bad things will happen. Right? It's necessary, and so is conditional. So centralization, decentralization. Anybody work in the in business, margin and mission, right? You know, especially in the nonprofit world, they're mission driven. If you're only mission driven and not thinking about margin, bad things will happen, right? So margin and mission, classic polarity. So there's classic individual
Evidence-based
polarities?
medicine and patient-centered care.
Absolutely. Say it again.
Evidence-based medicine where you're just on the guidelines, and patient-centered
Yeah.
care where you have a holistic
Yeah.
approach to
Yeah.
who are you and what do you need.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, healthcare is absolutely chock-a-block full of polarities. And the interesting thing is, one of the things I learned, values. So, how many of you have actually gone through a process where you've identified your values? So, the values exist in polarities. And you may think, that's not true, right? So, and the first time I heard that, and it was when I was learning this, I said, how is that? So one of my values is integrity. So explain to me how that's part of a polarity and the downsides. You say, well, if you are only interested in integrity to the exclusion of any other thought, what will happen? And it was like, I become rigid, I become inflexible, I become unforgiving, right? Integrity is part of a polarity with, could be flexibility, could be nuance, could be tolerance. Integrity and tolerance could be a polarity pair. It depends on the individual and how they think. And he said that most organizations list their values, and if they do not recognize them as polarity pairs, you might end up in some differences. And my mind immediately went, so at CVPH, and this is not a negative, at CVPH, one of our core values is patients first, right? Sounds like a good thing, right? Right? And most people ascribe to that. But what do some people hear when I say patients first?
Sky's the limit.
Doctors second, nurses second.
Staff second, exactly. The polarity is recognizing that you need to address both, right? So, organizationally, company-wide, look at your values and see, do you recognize the polarity, the pair in those list of values? And I thought about it, and so one of my values is knowledge. I got lucky. One of my other values is education, right? So we're learning. So knowledge and learning, right? Absolutely a polarity pair. So, values, that was sort of an eye-opener to me, to think of values as part of polarity pairs. And I immediately went to my list, and yes, some were missing. And the guy who talks about this talks about an interesting conversation. He was working with a multinational company, and they wanted to do some work on their values. And he said, "Oh, what are your values?" So what, because he was going to work with them. And they were a large multinational company, and one of their values was autonomous business units. And
Business what?
autonomous business units, which is another lingo thing for decentralization, local control, right? And he looked down the list and he didn't see anything that included the ideas of integration, collaboration, things that might be the other pole of decentralization. And so, and this guy he wrote the book, literally. And he said, I notice you have autonomous business units, but you don't have anything like this. And they said, no. And he said, here's my prediction. Either now or sometime in the future, you will start experiencing, and he started listing off some of the downsides of autonomous business units. And he said, and you are going to feel motivated to start integrating and centralizing. He said, and you're not going to be able to do it. And he was on a phone call. The phone literally went dead. And then the chief executive officer said, who have you been talking to? And in fact, he said, 2 years ago, we had that conversation. And for 2 years, we've been trying to integrate. And we have been unable to. And it's because we had no explicit understanding of a polarity, and we were reluctant to give up the things we value about autonomy, and we were terribly afraid of the things that could happen from centralization. But that was just emotionally. We hadn't done any work to think about those. So that was the work that he did with that organization. And they went on to make tons of money. So it's pretty cool stuff. All right, I've talked enough. I don't know how to turn this off.
That one's better.
Yeah, use that one because it doesn't have a switch.
That was awesome. I am very excited about that. I'm going to go home and I'm like thinking about everything in terms of polarity now. You're probably going to get a call from my husband. He's going to have to watch this.
So get the book.
Yes, thank you. That
And
was really wonderful.
Once you start seeing polarities, you cannot unsee them.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
My wheels are spinning. The ripples are already starting. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to share with you all a few events that are coming up. We're in the season of events. So I have quite a list. So starting this weekend, the Peru Drama Club is hosting 10 Ways to Survive the Holidays, Friday night at 7:30. Saturday at 2 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. The Peru Drama Club is notoriously talented, so if you're interested, you should definitely go check them out.
Is this adults or high school?
It's high school.
It's high school.
Yeah, and it's a great program at Peru School.
Okay.
They're really good. Everything I've seen there has been phenomenal. I have to just make my font bigger. Let's see, First Presbyterian Church on Saturday is having a bake sale from noon to 3. At 3 p.m., a community carol hymn sing-along. And then from 5 to 7 p.m., they're going to have free hot chocolate and cookies during the parade, which is going to take place at 5:30 p.m., followed by a tree lighting at the Strand. And Saturday afternoon is also Miracle on Margaret Street, so there will be lots going on down here. Old Soul is hosting a holiday artisan market also on Saturday at Oval Brewing from 3 to 7, so check that out. Sunday we have Adrian Carr playing the 7 Wonders of Christmas.
7 words.
7 words of Christmas.
Thank you. 7 Words of Christmas at Memorial Chapel. That's at 3 p.m. on the base, followed by a down-home soulful Christmas at SUNY Plattsburgh at 5 p.m. at Glitz Auditorium. Monday, December 9th and December 16th, there's gentle yoga at the First Presbyterian Church. Sunday, December 15th, there's a holiday market at Living Goods Restaurant in Peru. And then, thinking ahead, we have our next Vinspire will be in the new year, January 8th, and that is a Wednesday. So it is really lovely to be able to intentionally gather and receive really incredible information that helps us all to grow and prosper. So we hope you will all take this wonderful information with you and watch some YouTube videos in the coming days so that we can really solidify this information that we've received. And
Yes.
how many people have seen the You Matter mural? Okay. I talk about being on so many committees, but that was this and that, and there's so many, I love them all, but that was near and dear to my heart. We are still selling sweatshirts, t-shirts. On the back it says, can you hold that for me? Dear person behind me, the world is a better place with you in it. You matter. Love the person in front of you. If you need someone to talk to, call, text 988. I wore mine to SPAC this summer on 2 different occasions, and we decided to sit inside. And I was sitting in my chair waiting for the event to happen, and this woman climbed over 3 rows and just whispered in my ear and said, I really needed to read that right now. And I got the goosies. And then we actually saw 2 concerts. I was standing in the beverage line, and someone said, I really needed to say it. So we aren't making money on these, but we are spreading a message to everybody that they matter, and that if they need someone to talk to, there's always someone. 988. You can call, let's say you have a friend that you're worried about, you can call yourself to get counseling and understand. So if you're interested, see me. There's no pressure. To get a price break, we can sell them at cost. I wait till I get 10 orders and then I put it through. So if you want to buy some for your family or friends, there's no end date. You can do it anytime. Anybody else have anything going on that they want to share?
They're very soft.
Yes, you can feel them. This is actually mine. I have one large unisex member sales, but the other two are mine. And they do have them in onesie. Giovannina Gucci designed the artwork and painted it while she was pregnant in that heat this summer, and we got her baby a onesie with it. We didn't have the message on the back, but we had the mural. So thank you. I love seeing the new faces and the familiar faces. If you're not on our mailing list, I have some paper. I'll take it. Did you get yours, Kathy? Did you get the email? Look for MailChimp. Our email server is MailChimp, so it could go to spam. So check there. Okay. Because I made sure.